Hello, everybody. Welcome to the International Symposium on Service Learning and Responsible Global Citizenship. I am Grace Ngai. I am the head of the Service Learning and Leadership Office at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. I wish you all good afternoon for those of you who are in the East Asia, Southeast Asia region, or good morning, or good evening, good night, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us from all around the world. It is really so wonderful to see all of you here, and we are so excited for this event to begin. This is the first time that we are running an event like this. In pre-COVID days, we used to organize the International Conference on Service Learning every 2 years, and that was, of course, a face-to-face event. When we were thinking about how we would move the conference online, we started thinking, how about if we try to use the technology to make this more inclusive for higher education colleagues, for higher education students, and also for our primary and secondary school peers? So we decided that we just go for it, right, and dream big and make use of the technology and online communications, make use of what that can offer, rather than using technology as a stopgap to replace what we have lost. So let me give you some statistics. As of this morning, we have almost 900 registrants from 34 countries and regions, representing over 200 universities, schools, NGOs, and private corporations. And that is really amazing. That is an unprecedented number and diversity, and we are so excited to have all of you here. We hope that we have succeeded in making a program that will be exciting to all of you. And please to take the time to leave us some feedback and help us to improve. Remember, this is the first time that we are doing this. Now, I know that all of you are looking forward to the start of the program, so I shouldn't keep you any longer. We will first start with a welcome speech from our president, Professor Jingguan Tang. However, because of other commitments, unfortunately, Professor Tang can't be here to give his speech live, so we have pre-recorded his welcome, and we are going to play this now.
Professor Harry Lewis, Professor Andrew Furco, Dr. Luca Terra, Mr. Dion Chang, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, I would like to welcome you most warmly to our International Symposium and Expo on Service Learning and Socially Responsible Global Citizenship. At PolyU, we aim to nurture our students to become socially responsible global citizens. And we take pride in our service learning program, which integrates academic study and reflection with community surveys that addresses people's needs. This has become one of the hallmarks of PolyU's undergraduate education. Our students can choose from among over 60 service learning subjects, where our teaching is underpinned by research that informs our methods such that we continue to evolve and improve to deepen our students' learning and thus better meet changing societal needs. We're happy to report that our research shows our service learning program positively impacts our students' civic orientation and social responsibility. And this impact continues even after graduation. In recognition of our research work in this area, we have won an award from the International Association for Research on Service Learning and Community Engagement. While COVID-19 has posed many challenges for education, I'm pleased that our teachers and students have been able to keep most of our service learning subjects running during this difficult time. Over the last year, our students have contributed over 250,000 hours of effort in technology-driven or technology-enhanced service learning. The services have ranged from language teaching to speech therapy to teleengineering, helping people in Hong Kong, mainland China, Taiwan, Cambodia, Vietnam, and even as far away as South Africa and Rwanda. We know that other like-minded educators and students have also been making efforts in this area. For instance, I know that about 60 service learning projects initiated by teachers and students from tertiary institutions and secondary schools from 16 countries and regions will be presented today. Their efforts and accomplishments are most commendable indeed. Building upon what we have already achieved, we strive to take service learning into new directions and dimensions. This International Symposium and Expo is organized as a new space for global dialogues, where our international counterparts and stakeholders can interact, explore, and learn from each other through our successes, failures, and many varied and valuable experiences. Finally, to my fellow teachers and educators, I wish to express my heartfelt thanks for all the efforts they have made in educating our students. I'm a scientist, so I'm going to quote from a fellow scientist, Marie Curie, the first woman to receive a Nobel Prize and the first person to receive 2 Nobel Prizes. You cannot hope to build a better world without improving the individuals. To that end, each of us must work for his own improvement and at the same time share a general responsibility for all humanity. Our particular duty being to aid those to whom we think we can be most useful. I wish all of you a fruitful and insightful symposium, and I look forward to welcoming you all in Hong Kong in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tang. Just like Professor Tang, I really hope that we will be able to invite all overseas participants to physically be in Hong Kong in person next time. Now, the first item on our schedule is the keynote address from Professor Harry Lewis of Harvard University. Now here, I'm suspecting that most people already know who Professor Lewis is, and many of you may also have read his book, Excellence Without a Soul. Actually, a small vignette, our Vice President of Research and Innovation quoted from the exact book yesterday at our university's annual strategic forum. And he did that to remind all of our deans, department heads, senior management, and chair professors why and how they should be doing research. So I thought that was really interesting. Now, let me introduce Professor Lewis, even though he probably doesn't take much introducing. Professor Lewis is Gordon McKay Research Professor of Computer Science at Harvard's John A. Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. He graduated from Harvard College in 1968. He served as a commissioned officer in the US Public Health Service, and then he returned for his PhD and joined the Harvard faculty. During his time at Harvard, Professor Lewis curated Harvard's undergraduate computer science curriculum and the computer science major itself, and he has long served as the director of undergraduate studies in computer science. Professor Lewis has also served as Dean of Harvard College and as interim Dean of Harvard's Engineering School. Now, when we think about Harvard and computer science, we automatically think of Facebook and Microsoft. And indeed, Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, and Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, are both Professor Lewis's students, as is the founder of TripAdvisor and many professors at many leading American CS departments, including my own PhD supervisor, Professor David Yarosky at Johns Hopkins University. Now, the amazing thing about Professor Lewis is that he really is more than just another CS professor. He's also an educator. He doesn't just teach computer science courses and concepts, he also teaches about computer science in society and computing history, and I find that really amazing. He has authored several books that explore the relevance of higher education to society. So, for example, Excellence Without a Soul. Another is What is College For? For those of us who are technologists, Blown to Bits, Your Life, Liberty, Happiness After the Digital Explosion is very interesting, and also Ideas That Created the Future. Professor Lewis's talk today is titled Learning as Service. We are going to have simultaneous interpretation in Cantonese and Mandarin. We will also have a question and answer time after the talk. Now, since we have a big audience today, we are going to use some technology to help us to manage our questions. In the chat box and also on the screen coming up, we are going to have, there's a link, okay, so you should be able to see it, yeah, this side, okay. There's a link to a platform called Poll Everywhere. So we want you to type your questions there, and you can also upvote and downvote your questions. And after Professor Lewis's talk, we will pick the most popular questions from the poll. So if you want to ask a question, please make sure that it is here. Now, before we start Professor Lewis's talk, I think we would like to take this opportunity with all of us here to have a big photo shoot. Okay, so please turn on your camera if you want to be in the picture. Okay, we have a lot of people here, so turn on the camera. We are going to ask you to smile, make sure that your face is clearly within the camera. Please hold your smile for 10 seconds because it's going to take time for us to look through all the different pages to get everybody in there. And then we're going to stitch it into one big picture and we're going to send that to everybody. So please hold. Are we ready to start taking the photo? Okay, so hold your smile for 10 seconds, okay? Great, okay, thank you so much. Okay, so without further ado, I pass the time to Professor Lewis. Professor Lewis, please.
Thank you so much, Grace. I really appreciate that lovely introduction. And I have some slides to share. So let me do that and make sure we do it the right way here. And how does that look? Do you see my title slide? All right, now I've just got to rearrange the screen a little bit here. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, or as Grace said, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. It's evening where I am. I'm so happy to be joining you today. I only wish I could be with you in person. I greatly miss the regular trips I used to take to Hong Kong and to the Chinese mainland, talking to people in the great universities I visited, including Hong Kong Poly. The hospitality was always wonderful. Food was always excellent. And more importantly, it made me feel part of the world's academic society. When Grace invited me to give this address, we quickly found an unexpected way in which we are related academically, as she just mentioned. Her PhD advisor was my undergraduate advisee. But even academics who share no family ties like that are related in ways that other professionals aren't. When Harvard students get their degrees at commencement every spring, the president stands at the front of an enormous outdoor gathering with the graduates sitting up front and their families sitting, filling the rear of Harvard Yard. At the crucial moment, the president uses a phrase that always sticks in my mind. He welcomes the new graduates to the ancient and universal company of scholars. Now, nothing like that is said of medical doctors or lawyers when they get their degrees. The universal company of scholars. It's global and it's timeless. You are part of that universal company too. And the main purpose of my address today is to talk to you about what that means. Now, we are here together, only virtually, alas, because you are part of a special branch of that company. You are engaged in service learning. What does that mean? It means you, and I'm going to address my remarks to the teachers and scholars among you, though my message is for the students too. You service learning faculty are expanding the education by teaching your students how to learn by helping other people, by being of service to them. You are teaching your students how to learn what it means to learn while being of service to others. You and your students are helping people help themselves, showing them how to electrify their houses or design their clothing or care for their elders. And your university includes this special kind of learning in the curriculum in the hope that your students will not just be of service to the people you are helping, but that they will develop the habit of helping others. That service will become part of what they take away from their university education. That they will keep doing it long after they earn their degrees. Your university hopes students will continue to be of service in the same way that it hopes graduates will engage in critical thinking, rational analysis, and persuasive argumentation long after they have stopped using those skills in their university courses, where of course their use is expected. Now, I am a Harvard man through and through. I've never left the place really since I was 17 years old, except for a couple of years when I was in national service. I love the place. It has its problems, and its history is far from flawless, and I've written about those things. But it's a wonderful place, and it's given a lot to the world. One of those things, it turns out, is the idea of organized national service of a kind that was not military service. That was first laid out in a 1906 address by William James. James was a Harvard philosophy professor who was generally regarded as one of the founders of the science of psychology. He gave that address at Stanford University, and it was called The Moral Equivalent of War. There was a lot wrong with that speech as we read it more than 100 years later. James was a pacifist, and among the spectacularly incorrect things in his speech was his belief that war was coming to an end. He thought that men might not have enough worthy things to do in a world of perpetual peace. As it was, World War I started only 5 years later, and that was hardly the last war either. So that premise was badly wrong. In any case, James thought that there should be some activity in which the youth of the world could more morally invest the energy and pride that, as he saw it, had up to then been invested exclusively in warfare. Here is what he proposed, and I'm quoting from him directly. There's nothing to make one indignant in the mere fact that life is hard, that men should toil and suffer pain, but that so many men, by mere accidents of birth and opportunity, should have a life of nothing else but toil and pain and hardness and inferiority imposed upon them, should have no vacation, while others, natively no more deserving, never get any taste of this life at all. This is capable of arousing indignation in reflective minds. If now, and this is my idea, there were an army enlisted against nature, the injustice would tend to be evened out. Now, before I go on, let me just interject here that the idea of a war against nature sounds pretty jarring in this time of environmental degradation and climate change, when we are much more interested in protecting nature than conquering it. But what James meant was the notion that misery was the natural and permanent state of humankind. That is what he wanted to go to war against. He went on. The luxurious classes now are blind to man's relations to the globe he lives in and to the permanently sour and hard foundations of his higher life, to coal and iron mines, to freight trains, to fishing fleets in December, to dishwashing, clothes washing, and window washing, to road building and tunnel making, to foundries and stoke holes, and to the frames of skyscrapers. Would our gilded youths be drafted off according to their choice to get the childishness knocked out of them and to come back into society with healthier sympathies and soberer ideas. End of quote. Now, it was in universities where this idea was picked up and developed over the past century and more. You are part of that tradition, and you are today at work instilling healthier sympathies and soberer ideas in your students. So service learning is different from classroom learning. Service learning happens out in the field, in direct contact with the people you are trying to help. The other kind of learning happens in classrooms and laboratories. Though, of course, what I'm calling classroom learning also happens in the occasional academic bubble in the field, at an Arctic research station or an archaeological dig. But these are really just university classrooms located somewhere other than the main campus. Of course, there is more to service learning than where it happens. Service learning is about students helping other people. And that means that regular classroom learning must be the opposite somehow. So if service learning is about students helping others, then classroom learning is about what? Students helping themselves? Well, that is certainly the way we often think about it. The US government puts out charts with titles like Education Pays, showing how much more money educated people will make in a lifetime, depending on how many years of higher education they have. There's certainly a big economic advantage to getting an education. So people get an education out of economic self-interest. And societies invest in higher education, in part because the economic self-interest of individuals adds up to create social upward mobility for whole populations. An economically progressive society needs an educated population. For example, the world needs more wordsmiths and codesmiths than ironsmiths today. That is all true, and yet there is something quite wrong about the picture of a university education as a sort of fusion of two different halves, classroom learning and service learning. Education is not some kind of bimetal strip, one side devoted to an obligation to help other people, and the other side devoted to helping ourselves. Now, that's a terrible analogy, but it's actually interesting to think about. When heated, a bimetal strip bends only one way. In the real world, the incentive for financial gain, or at least security, is likely to overwhelm the pull toward more charitable efforts. I'm sure you've heard students say exactly this in so many words. I know I have. Oh, that good work stuff. I'll get back to that later. Right now, I need to figure out how to make a good living, how to support a family. Once I've done that, I'll have the time and resources to do some good in the world, but not yet. Now, I want to be careful about ridiculing that sort of student. I certainly have known some who were not distinguished by their altruism when they were undergraduates, but who have gone on to become major philanthropists in later life. Bill Gates, for example, when he wasn't coding, he was mostly playing poker, as far as I can recall. And now he really is saving lives at a global scale and doing a remarkable job at it. But he's an exception. For most students, the habits and attitudes they learn as undergraduates stick with them, perhaps in some modified form, for the rest of their lives. And one of those bad habits you can get at university, you the student I mean, is to think on a short time scale, to try to optimize for the short run without regard to where you were going in the long run, to think you can remake yourself into a better person later on, even if you don't try to be a better person right now. In the same vein, I've heard students say that they intend to become more honest in the long run, once they are successful and financially secure. But right now, they have to cheat to get ahead because everyone else is cheated. Somehow, I don't think they're going to become more honest later on if they are successfully cheating while they are young. Let me say a few more words about timescales. The great thing about service learning is that it gets students to confront the world's ills as they really are. But success in opening students' eyes to the present can, if we are not careful, blind them to the future. I have an anecdote to explain that. I'm quoting here from a Carnegie Foundation report. A student volunteering at a soup kitchen very much enjoyed the experience and felt that it had made him a better person. Without thinking through the implications of his statement, he said, "I hope it is still around when my children are in college so they can work here too." Now, there are various ways to describe what went wrong with this person. Put most simply, the student has been made to confront the plight of his fellow human beings and to feel empathetic. But he has failed to understand that the point of the exercise was not just to develop his empathy and not just to respond in the moment to the here and now. Service learning is part of this student's education, but that education is not just about him and the way it makes him feel today. Somewhat more abstractly, one could say that this student hasn't come to grips with the timescales on which various human interventions can operate. That the solution to the problem of hunger is not to build more soup kitchens, nor better ones, nor more permanent ones. But most importantly, I would say, the student has lost sight of his civic responsibilities as he has personalized his soup kitchen experience. He has lost sight of, or never understood, the opportunity he has as an educated person to make a larger difference in the world, in the longer run, through civic leadership and political action and support of education itself. Now, I'm sure you already knew that we should not let students think that their education is mostly about their personal success. It's wrong-headed for lots of reasons, but to start with, it's setting them up for a midlife crisis some years in the future when they have become successful and can't figure out why they suddenly feel empty. How it came to pass that they have made a life that feels meaningless, lacking in purpose or even coherence. It's our obligation as educators to get our students to get into the habit of asking themselves why they are getting an education in the first place. That is key to having their education be the basis for a productive, satisfying, and meaningful life, no matter how successful we can help them make it for the short run. Of course, we too are guilty of encouraging temporal myopia. We set up degree requirements as incoherent checklists, and students dutifully focus on getting the boxes all checked off. But even if we can impose enough rules and regulations on them that they will never think about the why of it all, and just think that their only job is to check the boxes unquestioningly, we can't control what they will think of all that the day after they graduate or a decade later. Their doubts and misgivings are very likely to emerge too late for their education to help resolve them. While we have their attention, we have to give them a deeper sense of what education is about. So let's turn to that. I want to start with something written about the reasons for getting an education way back in 1620, at the very dawn of the European Enlightenment, by Francis Bacon. In English, it's a bit antiquated in its diction, but except for that, every word of it could have been written yesterday. So here goes. Men have entered into a desire of learning and knowledge, sometimes upon a natural curiosity and inquisitive appetite, sometimes to entertain their minds with variety and delight, sometimes for ornament and reputation, and sometimes to enable them to victory of wit and contradiction, and most times for lucre and profession, and seldom sincerely to give a true account of the gift of reason to the benefit and use of man. Yes, now just as then, those who love learning do it for fun or to show off how smart and clever they are, and most often to make money at it, but seldom to give a true account of the gift of reason. That's a phrase that's invoked when Harvard presidents are inaugurated, for the benefit and use of man. All learning is learning for the benefit and use of humankind, in the short run or the long run. Our work as scholars and educators is in service of that mission. I sketched a caricature of a university education, an education which is partly or mainly about making the student more able to earn a living, bonded to a thin layer of an education about helping other people. This caricature utterly misstates what education is about, which is giving a true account of the gift of reason, whatever that means. So let's get concrete. An education, in fact, the very idea of a university, is about two things, and they aren't the self and others. Universities are about, on the one hand, preserving and transmitting the past, and on the other, about creating the future, hopefully a future that is better than the present. On the one hand, there are products of civilization which, if let go for a generation, could completely disappear from the face of the earth. How to read hieroglyphics, for example. That was handed down for thousands of years in Egypt. And then there was a last generation that could read them, and then nothing for several thousand years more. The art was reconstructed with great effort a couple of centuries ago. But if someone were to shut down all the world's Egyptology departments, wipe out every memory of what those hieroglyphs mean, then that knowledge would be lost again, perhaps forever this time. There are those in the United States who think that the idea of human freedom and the rule of law are similarly imperiled institutions, that we will forget that the law is, as the Harvard president says when conferring degrees on graduates of the law school, wise restraints that make us free. Universities are the places where our history, our culture, our wisdom, such as we possess it, are carried forward. The fact that many aspects of human culture, many parts of human memory, are hanging by a thread with us. And if we don't carry that memory forward, it will be lost. That is why we teach. But universities are also in the futures business. I mean, the inventions and discoveries and new knowledge we create to make the future better than the past and the present. We are in the business of creating human progress. That is why research goes hand in hand with teaching in universities. They are two vectors pointed in the same direction. We professors are at the head of one arrow and the tail of the other. It is my own view that in American universities, for various reasons, the teaching role has become unhappily subordinated to the research role. The creation of the future is what earns the big rewards, especially in departments of science and engineering. The past seems not so important if you are convinced that your main job is to make a better future. But the past is never dead, as the great American novelist William Faulkner wrote. It's not even past. You can't understand your own future if you don't understand our collective past. Hong Kong universities are based on an amalgam of British and American systems. But this duality between the past and the future is best understood in American terms. From the very beginning, American universities served these dual purposes of preserving civilization, receiving it and passing it on, and creating the future through scholarship and research. Here are some words about the founding of Harvard College from New England's First Fruits, which was published in 1643, just a few years after the founding of Harvard, the oldest of the American universities. These words are inscribed on a tablet mounted inside the main gate to Harvard Yard, as I show here. Do pause and read them if you have a chance to come to visit us in Cambridge. Here's how those settlers described their reasons for founding Harvard. After God had carried us safe to New England, and we had built our houses, provided necessaries for our livelihood, reared convenient places for God's worship, and led the civil government, one of the next things we longed for and looked after was to advance learning and perpetuate it to posterity, dreading to leave an illiterate ministry to the churches when our present ministers shall lie in the dust. Now, that's a remarkable passage. First of all, it suggests that it was rather an obvious thing to start a college. It was just something you had to do when you settled in the wilderness after building your houses, churches, and the basic structures of survival and government. Then there are the dual purposes of advancing learning and perpetuating it. That is, advancing and preserving knowledge, looking forward and looking back. And then there is the explicit vocational education note. The college was not built to be an ivory tower where scholars could talk to each other. It was built because there were no guarantees that any more ships would be arriving from England with replacement ministers on board. The colonists were on their own, and they needed to create an institution that would serve their needs. It would be a mistake to credit those devout and God-fearing Puritans with much respect for the gift of reason as they set up camp in the New England wilderness only a few years after Bacon had written the lines I quoted. But the Puritans certainly understood that learning was for the benefit and use of man. And that was very different from the way Oxford and Cambridge saw themselves. Oxford, for example, to this day, is actually run by academics because it started as a self-organized group of scholars. But Harvard was started by ordinary people, not academics. That is why Harvard to this day is organized as a corporation with lay governors, not professors, that is, in ultimate control of the place. The lay boards still represent the public interest. The professors later got academic freedom, but not the right to run the place. Virtually every American university followed something like this model, with the public interest at the top of the organization chart. That students should be expected to be of service in one way or another is very natural in this structure. In fact, some great American universities write that into their mottos. For example, while Harvard's motto is just the Latin word for truth, Princeton's is in the nation's service and the service of humanity. To this day, many faculty tend not to understand their obligation to society and the basis for the tax exemptions American universities receive, and so on. Their confusion is a result of a persistent misunderstanding that American universities are modeled on our British forebears, which really were self-organized aggregates of professors. The historian Bernard Balin wrote a wonderful piece about this years ago, in which he quoted from a letter Bertrand Russell wrote after visiting the University of Wisconsin in the early years of the 20th century. Whenever some farmer's turnips go wrong, Russell wrote, they send a professor to investigate the failure scientifically. He was bewildered that in a place so sensitive to taxpayers' needs, they would want to pay him to lecture on the foundations of mathematics. He did not understand that the American university always has been about both cultural and intellectual inheritance, and about creating the future, and about solving the problems the local farmers were having with their crops, as well as delving into the absolute truths of pure mathematics. Now, the relative indifference to education in many great universities, by comparison to research, happened in part because teaching is fundamentally a preservationist activity, and research is a futurist activity. And the resulting general lack of educational coherence results from the lack of any serious commitment to the famous aphorism of Harvard's George Santayana, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." It is as though we think that understanding the present suffices for the future, since after all, everything that can change the future is already baked into the state of the world as it is today. If you think the future can be predicted from the present, why would you need to understand the past? Now, finally, I can get to my main point. You who are active in service learning are doing important work, not just for your students and for the communities they are serving, but for the world at large. And yet, you are not alone among teachers and scholars in that regard. All learning is a form of service. Teachers, researchers, and scholars are preserving civilization and trying to improve it, one student and one academic work at a time. Students are not just making a better life for themselves, they're reflecting on the fate of humanity, why life is worth living at all, and how they can contribute to the lives of others. In service learning, you're making sure that students confront the present, the actual lives of actual human beings as they actually are, and that is important. But sometimes consolidating the past, confronting the present, and imagining a better future requires solitude rather than human interactions. In fact, I think that our extreme degree of technological connectedness works against our efforts to get students to think deeply about themselves and their place in the world. It is hard, for example, to explore your identity by reading a novel and imagining what it would be like to be a different kind of person, to think their thoughts and have their ambitions and experiences, their loves. If your cell phone is binging every 10 seconds with urgent messages from Sam and Josie and Mary that you have to answer, sometimes you need to get away from the present to imagine the future. Every scholar is a service professional. We are all in our roles in service of civilization itself, its preservation, perpetuation, and improvement. It is a privilege to be in this role, though there are surely days when it feels like a form of personal sacrifice that our society does not value enough or even disparages. I know this well in the US, where expertise has in the past few years been an object of suspicion and resentment. But each of us who is involved in conveying the truth to our intellectual heirs and adding new knowledge to the storehouse, even microscopically, experiences a feeling of intrinsic worth that those cannot experience who make money one day and lose it the next. And the thing about knowledge, unlike money, is that it comes in infinite variety and can't easily be quantified. A contribution to knowledge that may look small today or beautiful but completely useless. But a generation from now, it may be the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle, the key needed to unlock some mystery. This happened over and over again. The basic research that made it possible to quickly produce mRNA vaccines started decades ago with no such concrete objective. Or to take an example from my own field, the mathematician G.H. Hardy proudly declared that number theory was useless. The reason he was proud of that was that he thought that it meant it could, in particular, never find military application. Go forward a couple of generations, and all of computer security is built on some of those beautiful phenomena about the properties of whole numbers. We don't know what we've got when we got it. Another generation has to come along to make our meager contributions to human knowledge into something really important. We have to take joy in learning for its own sake, not because we think it will never be useful. We just don't know. But the whole mountain of knowledge to which we are contributing our grains of sand will, we believe, serve humanity in the long run. We strain to preserve civilization because we see ourselves as part of a great chain of learning. The playwright Tom Stoppard described that chain in his play Arcadia. One character is trying to reassure another that nothing that has happened or been thought is ever lost. We shed as we pick up, says the character, like travelers who must carry everything in their arms, and what we let fall will be picked up by those behind. The procession is very long and life is very short. We die on the march, but there is nothing outside the march, so nothing can be lost to it. The missing plays of Sophocles will turn up piece by piece or be written again in another language. Ancient cures for diseases will reveal themselves once more. Mathematical discoveries glimpsed and lost to view will have their time again. That Stoppard vision is all true, but only if we all do our part. And don't forget that beautiful things of no immediate practical application, poems and artworks and musical compositions, are useful too, if they inspire others or help them understand their place in the world. Even when no one cares about our work, or when it meets resistance and hostility, and we are afraid to pursue it, we follow beauty and truth because that pursuit is a service to posterity, and we are in it for the long run. As Francis Bacon also wrote, truth is the daughter not of authority, but time. It takes patience and confidence to know that truth will win out if we do our part to develop and defend it. Students too are part of the future, and every teacher is a service professional too. You are performing a service to them through your mentorship, your demands, your kindness. It is hard to remember on a day-to-day basis when you have too many papers to mark and your students are making too many petty complaints and requests. But after more than 45 years of teaching, I am far less impressed by what I did for my most famous students than by what the ones I don't even remember tell me I did for them. And also what other students say their professors did that they have never forgotten for all the wrong reasons. I once met a middle-aged gay couple at an event, and apparently one of them had taken my introductory computer science theory course when he was an undergraduate. He wanted me to know that when I went off my lesson plan, and I certainly did that a lot, and told the tragic story of the life and death of Alan Turing, the forefather of computer science, that was the first time he felt at home at Harvard. And on the other hand, I once took a very successful graduate to lunch, and across the room, I noticed a faculty colleague she probably would have known. I offered to take her over to say hello, and she quickly declined. The last time I saw him, she said, was to ask for a recommendation for graduate school. He told me that if he wrote one, it wouldn't be worth the postage it would take to mail it. She never forgot that petty slight, almost 50 years later. Our small words matter, and like the words of ministers and priests, small comments can be influential and unforgettable. We can't measure our worth in quantitative terms here either. All we can do is to be kind to our students in confidence that our small kindnesses will propagate downstream. Now I have just two more points to make, and I'm going to take us back to William James to make them. First, I've said that learning is a service profession, but what I have called classroom learning, both scholarship and the direct instruction of students, is different from other service vocations in one particular way. It is highly competitive. Professors compete to write the best books and to make the best scientific discoveries. Universities compete to build the best laboratories and to attract the best scholars. Students compete for admission to the best universities and to gain top marks once they have matriculated. Nurses and clerics don't compete like that. We expect them to be 100% altruistic all the time and never think about themselves. As in any marketplace, competition in university improves quality. Biochemistry moves faster because every biochemistry professor wants to make the critical discovery before any other professor does. But it can distort the perspective of the individual student, the individual participant. Because its goal is to improve society as a whole, education is not a zero-sum market. Victory for one party today need not mean loss for another or for the future. That is why cheating is so disappointing in higher education, whether by students or by faculty. There is always more to learn. A student who is a little worse at one subject can be better at another. A professor can find many ways to be valuable to her students without being the best in her field. Service learning is generally a relief from the competitive aspects of academic life, an opportunity for students to see themselves in purely altruistic terms and not as conquerors of anything. This particular form of complementarity between classroom learning and service learning is healthy for students and faculty alike. But I must pause to note that this is not at all what William James had in mind. When he spoke of the moral equivalent of war, he really did mean that national service to improve the lot of the less fortunate would excite the same competitive, conquering spirit as military training did and still does. With a properly conceived service program, he thought, and I'm going to quote him directly again, we should get toughness without callousness, authority with as little criminal cruelty as possible, and painful work done cheerily because the duty is temporary and threatens not, as now, to degrade the whole remainder of one's life. I spoke of the moral equivalent of war. So far, war has been the only force that can discipline a whole community. And until an equivalent discipline is organized, I believe that war must have its way. But I have no serious doubt that the ordinary prides and shames of social man, once developed to a certain intensity, are capable of organizing such a moral equivalent as I have sketched, or some other just as effective for preserving manliness of type. It is but a question of time and of opinion-making men seizing historic opportunities. Now, I really do wonder what you think about that. Is anything like that within your service learning experience or in your imagination? James really did think that, like military service, this form of national service would be just for men. Finally, I'd like to strike a different note. Service learning is about developing human empathy and learning how to act on it. It's about our interconnections. And I began this talk by offering some collegiality with you all as fellow members of the ancient and universal company of scholars. But I also put in a word for disconnection too, you will recall, that it is impossible for young persons to explore alternative identities and to discover their true selves if they are constantly tied to the here and now, constantly recalibrating themselves against the expectations of their peers and authority figures. So I also want to put in a word for loneliness, for eccentricity, for feeling out of place. Maybe you or your student really are that one person trying to keep alive the meaning of the Egyptian hieroglyphs, or any number of other unpopular or disparaged subjects other people think you really should not be studying. The mark of a great university and of a great society is that those lonely thinkers and students and scholars have a place within it. William James wrote another remarkable piece in 1903, less well known than The Moral Equivalent of War. It's called The True Harvard, and it's a paean to Harvard's way of sheltering oddballs and freethinkers. But please hear it as a hopeful description of any great university. The men I speak of, he said, and for whom I speak today, are Harvard's true missionaries and carry its gospel into infidel parts. When they come to Harvard, it's because they have heard of her persistently atomistic constitution, of her tolerance of exceptionality and eccentricity, of her devotion to the principles of individual vocation and choice. It is because you cannot make single one-ideaed regiments of her classes. It is because she cherishes so many vital ideals, yet makes a scale of value among them. The true Harvard is the invisible Harvard in the souls of her more truth-seeking and independent and often very solitary sons. Thoughts are the precious seeds of which our university should be the botanical gardens. Beware when God lets loose a thinker on the world, either Carlyle or Emerson said that, for all things then have to rearrange themselves. But the thinkers in their youth are almost always very lonely creatures. The university most worthy of rational admiration is that one in which your lonely thinker can feel himself least lonely, most positively furthered, and most richly fed. Here they find the climate so propitious that they can be happy in their very solitude. The day when Harvard shall stamp a single hard and fast type of character upon her children will be that of her downfall. Our undisciplinables are our proudest product. Let us agree together in hoping that the output of them will never cease. In my own teaching career, I've always hoped to live up to that standard, rather than seeing every nonconformist as a protruding nail to be hammered flat. I hope I may be forgiven for thinking that my greatest contribution to the careers of the extraordinary students I've had, Gates and Zuckerberg and many now eminent scholars in university departments everywhere, was to stay out of their way and to indulge their rebellious inclinations. I'd like to very much thank Hong Kong Polytechnic University for the invitation to join you, and I'd like to thank you for listening to me today. I hope I've given you some things to think about. Being a scholar or a professor or a teacher in a university can be lonely work and frustrating as we combat forces arrayed against us. Remember that service you are providing to your students and to the pursuit of knowledge and to posterity is part of what you are doing in service learning. But what you do in the classroom is in service of the same ultimate ends. In all aspects of your academic life, you are engaged in a single noble activity. All your teaching and all your scholarship is in service of the preservation and improvement of human civilization. You should be proud to be able to reconcile your ambitions with your disappointments in your daily work for the benefit and use of man. Thank you so very much. And now let's move to a discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor Lewis. Actually, the quote that you had at the end, at your last slide, that reminds me very much of the motto of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, which is somewhat similar. We say that what we want is to learn and to apply for the benefit of mankind. So kind of along the same lines of recognizing what learning and service, what learning and research is about, even though, as you so succinctly put it, oftentimes in universities we forget about the service part, right? We forget, we feel, we are so consumed with the learning, with the research, that we forget about the service, right? So there are some questions. I think that there might be some more that are coming in as people digest. There is a question which I think I'll bring this one out first. So it's difficult sometimes being a university professor, right? And sometimes, even though it really should not be a zero-sum game, it feels very much like a zero-sum game. There's only a limited amount of pie, there's only a limited amount of pot of money, and we all have to be struggling for the same grants, the same budget every year. Would you have any suggestions for like professors like us, how should we learn to think to persist through the hardship?
All I can say about that is that you have to, it's really important to have time where you weekly or every couple of weeks where you put away your email and your text messages and you go for a walk. I tell this to students, but I tell it to my faculty colleagues too, and try to remind yourself what the basic principles are of your life and why you're doing this work in the first place, and what's important, because we inevitably get drawn into, what I'm calling local optimizations, that we need to write one more grant proposal. We need to, get one more paper out and so on. And you have to remind yourself, you have to ask yourself whether, each individual thing that you do is really in service of, what your ultimate objectives really are. Now, this is easier said than done. I mean, I remember how miserable I was when I was coming up for tenure. I mean, that's just, you just, of course you were going to get, maybe 33 papers will get me tenure and 32 papers won't. Then I better write that extra paper. I don't know what the objective function is that I'm trying to, optimize against, and I actually had a very fortunate thing happen to me in the middle of that, which is I became gravely ill and almost died. And it was actually a very good thing, because all of a sudden I was worried about survival rather than my family and all, these other things. And I said, okay, I've done what I can do about the tenure process, and it'll come out where it comes out. So, you have to, as you're doing these local optimizations, you have to, you just have to learn to take a step back and, and take a look at the larger things in life. The other thing I would say, and this is quite personal with me, and it won't apply equally to everyone else, but I always find that trying to help individual students or individual colleagues very reassuring. That is to say, at the end of the day, you have that paper and you think you only have one little chink to fill in, and then you work until midnight and you can't get that part right, and you go to bed frustrated, and you go to bed frustrated again the next day. But if you have a conversation with somebody who can gain something by having a conversation with you, whether it's a student or a colleague or something, and you walk away with the feeling, well, gee, I helped that person a little bit. You feel you've done some good for the world, at least, even if you haven't made a you haven't made the great leap forward that you thought you were, you needed to do in order to, get on to the next day. So I find human interactions, it's been one of the things I've missed over the past year, is the opportunity for sort of, unscheduled, low pressure human interactions where, sometimes I'm sharing my problems, I'm really thinking of the things where I'm giving others an opportunity to share their problems with me. I always find I have a greater sense of self-worth at the end of those conversations. And they help me get from one day to the next.
Thank you so much for that. What you said about about tenure, like all of a sudden it brought back a whole flood of memories for me as well. And for colleagues who are approaching that process, which I know that there are quite a number of in the audience, I hope that that also lends you some encouragement. There is a question that is very highly voted up on the on the platform, and it is about the difference between the UK system, Oxford, Cambridge, and then
Yes.
Harvard. So okay, I'll read out the question to you. You mentioned two ways in which Oxford, and Harvard, two different ways in which these universities are governed. So which of them is more efficient, run by academics or by corporations? And I think that is there, yeah.
No, I mean it's an entirely it's a very reasonable question, and it's extremely, the American system, where the boards of governors, the Harvard, at Harvard it's called the corporation, often called the board of trustees, whatever the ultimate oversight organization is. And it's different in the public sector than in the private sector. In the public sector, those groups are often appointed by the government. They're government officers. They're appointed by the governor of the state or something like that. In private universities like Harvard, they vote themselves in, but they say they of course the frustrating thing with them is that we professors often think, with good reasons, that they don't understand where the future is going, and they only want the department of turnip fixing. They want we don't have an agricultural college at Harvard, but there are certainly plenty of forces that say that immediately practical subjects should be favored over the study of ancient languages, let's say. In the state system, there's the worst problem that those bodies can force their political will on the faculty, or can attempt to. There's a lot of that happening in the United States right now, where in certain states the boards are trying to, and the government is trying to prevent certain kinds of teaching from happening because they believe it's an unfriendly view of racial history in the United States or whatever. So that system has its problems, but I must say, I mean, I've never lived under the Oxford system, so I'm not really in a position to argue which is better, but I do like the fact that under our system, we are regularly reminded, if not explicitly, at least implicitly, that our main output, the people that we are educating, by and large, are not going to become professors. I mean, our PhD students is different. Our PhDs, I mean, of course, in my field, even most of our PhD students don't become professors, but certainly our undergraduates are not going to become professors. And it's very easy for faculty whose only sense of worth is coming from other professors to think that they're in the business of producing professors, but that's not mostly what society needs, right? Society definitely needs more professors. It needs a sufficient supply of professors to keep universities running. But there are about 1,600 Harvard College graduates every year, and if we produce 1,600 professors, the American society would not be well served by that. But that's what professors left to themselves might well do. So, to be honest, what I said about the academic structure at Oxford is correct. But what its real implications are for the day-to-day life of Oxford faculty and administration, I really am not. There are probably people on this call who could explain that better than I can, because I've never actually lived under that system.
Thank you so much. I remember the dean of the School of Engineering, and then later on our vice president of research. He used to say, remember, our students are not us. You can't teach them like you would like to be taught. And I remember that as a junior faculty member, and that's still something that I remember today. There's a question, what were some of the important or key attributes that you observed, in your high profile or unforgettable students who have gone on to become very successful individuals, if there is any commonality at all? Yeah.
They were imps. They were imps. They were. I mean, they all had better things to do than listen to me. I'll be perfectly honest. They were, some of them were great students. Some of them were not so great students. I'm not going to, among the names that you read out here, I'm not going to tell you which fell into which fell into which category. But one thing that was uniformly true for all of them is that if they came to class, they were very sleepy. Okay, because they were very, very busy doing things other than my problem sets, and they were very smart. There's no question that they, it's not like, they certainly didn't give any impression that they were, unprepared or stupid or, far from it. They were all extremely smart, but they were just doing lots of other stuff that we were completely unaware of as faculty. Completely unaware of. Gates was writing the original Microsoft Basic Interpreter product right under our noses, and it took a long time before anybody noticed. And Zuckerberg. I should have had some sense of what Zuckerberg was up to, because he approached me. This is if I could tell this story if we got a minute. He sent me. This is after he'd taken my course, and it was dean of the college and so on. He sent me an email, and the subject line of the email was 6 degrees to Harry Lewis, and he told me that he'd made a website where he'd scraped the Crimson archives. The Crimson's the student newspaper, because he was playing with social networks, he explained, but he didn't have a database of an actual social network. He had to create a phony social network database to do his experiments with. And so he scraped the archives of the Harvard Crimson and connected names that were mentioned in the same story with a link. And because I'd been dean of the college for 8 years, I was in the Crimson every day. So I was going to be the central node. And, this is the way you were going to type in your name, and you were going to see how many hops it took to get to the central node, which was me. So that's why he wanted to call this site 6 degrees to Harry Lewis. So, these guys, I actually wound up saying, yeah, sure, what the hell, seems harmless. He wanted to know whether it was okay to use my name. And I said, fine, whatever. Sounds like a good exercise for, because there were other social networks around at the time. And he figured it was a good project for a sophomore do something, So, I mean, I think when I close this talk by saying, that it's important, particularly I think for those of us in science and engineering, to be indulgent of our students and the fact that they're doing things that we don't think are particularly important. Gates, I remember, I never told Gates this, but I know one of my colleagues on the faculty told Gates to stop working on microcomputers because, they were so weak. And he had these enormous machines that he really needed help optimizing disk seek activity and all the rest of this stuff and the operating systems and so on. And here he was fooling around with a machine that didn't even have a disk drive, and he was wasting his time. So, we are captives of our own limited imagination, and so we have to indulge the young and try to encourage them, at least not discourage them just because they're spending their times doing stuff other than our homework, or in addition to our homework, let's say.
I think that's especially important for, as you say, science and engineering, and especially for computer science to remember, because oftentimes we tunnel so much into our own vision of, what the future is, that we forget there's a whole other world out there. There is an education philosophical question that's getting voted a lot. Could you address the fact that education is becoming, or actually maybe it should be, that high quality education is becoming more and more inaccessible to the majority of people, because it is so expensive that only those who are privileged to be able to pay for it can access it. And it seems to be hardly the equality and perpetuation of knowledge that we strive for.
Yeah, well, so there's two sides to that question. So as I say, the primacy of research is a artifact of our well, it comes from a couple of sources. It comes, it's a byproduct of the competition, which, as I say, is healthy in many ways between institutions and between faculty. So, and it's also a byproduct of government funding, which is more heavily biased towards research than towards education. The issue of inaccessibility is a really interesting one. I don't know whether that, again, that's a question that probably has different answers depending on what society you're, referring to. I mean, I know, I understand this phenomenon in the American context pretty well. I don't know how to put it into the context of Hong Kong or China or anywhere else, but it's an odd thing has happened in the United States, which is that the very highest quality education is actually completely free, or there's no financial barrier at an institution like Harvard. Harvard, if you pay, you look it up on the Harvard website, and the Harvard tuition is some extraordinary amount of money that most people don't have. But Harvard also actually admits students without regard to their ability to pay, and will pay full scholarships to those who can't afford it. And that's true at some number of other American premier institutions. Probably your alma mater, Grace's, as well. It's very close to that at Brown, if not completely true. So the sad part, in my opinion, and I'm hoping that the current American government will do something about this, has to do with the public education system, which is, of course, where most American college students get their degrees from. In the public education system, the cost of the tuitions have gone up because the state legislatures have reduced their subsidies given to the universities. And so they charge higher tuitions, and that's created exactly the economic stratification that the questioner asked about. And it's even crazier than that, in that we actually have in the United States this phenomenon where there are some merit scholarships. So, students who are very, very qualified academically can win those. And so you have a phenomenon where students from neighboring states will find the regular tuition in their own state too high, but will wind up getting a merit scholarship at a neighboring state and move out of state at lower cost, which makes no sense. So I think their government priorities are messed up in terms of higher education, and maybe the Biden administration will do something about that. I can't on the global scale. I can't really comment on it, but it's definitely a very important issue, and I'm glad your questioner raised it.
Mm. So there are a couple of questions that kind of are along the same vein, which is basically, so what we have all got limited time, right? So what is more important, right? To create the future yourself, or to preserve the past. Like, how do we strike a healthy balance between rigor, service, and compassion? And actually, that was one question that was asked by one of the department heads yesterday when the VP research quoted your book. Literally, the question was, what should we, which one should we pick? Excellence or the soul, right? So how would you comment on that? And then I'll tell you what our vice president research said. Yeah.
Well, my own view is you can't there. It's a hollow excellence if you're I've had there's a prize given at Harvard for the number one student academically, the top grade point average across all 1,600 graduating seniors over 4 years. They calculate the grade point averages to 5 decimal places, and the person at the top gets a prize. And two of my students over the 45 years I've taught, 2 of my students won that prize. Neither one of them was ever heard from again the day after they graduated. They went into some, I think one became a banker. I'm sure, the world needs good bankers and all the rest of that stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, he's had a job that 1,000 other people could have done just as well as he's done it. And he's made no impact on the world. And yet somehow Harvard considered him the best student. Well, he wasn't the best student by any rational sense of this. So and the other one, was an even unhappier story, which I won't tell. But we have to have a sensible definition of what excellence means. There is no best human being in your university. There is, and competition to try to become the best is inevitably going to take you somewhere. So I think the all you can do is to try to regularly refocus people's attention on, where do you want to be? What will you consider a successful life to have been 25 years later? My wife, until she retired a few days ago, was director of admissions for Harvard College, and you know, people would talk later. You know, they ask her later, "Well, you admitted the student. You know, was that a successful admission? You know, the person get to senior year. You know, was that a successful admission?" "Oh, how would I know? This person's only a senior now. You know, come back to me at this. I'll look at the person's 50th college reunion. That's when I'll know whether this was a good admissions case, right? It was not whether what they're doing when they at the moment that they graduate. We, you know, of course, you know, we're academics, and you know, we try to set up these metrics, but the real excellence takes much longer to be confident about, and you have to keep reminding yourself, you know, what the ultimate objectives are.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I certainly do remember some of my students, just like what you say, high GPAs, you know, were getting straight A's, everything. And then after they graduated, yeah, were sad stories. Oh, we never heard from them again. That is,
Yeah.
and you know, wonderful students whom didn't really strike me as much when we admitted them, but then turned out to be some of those that we were proudest of.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a question which is very interesting, and I think I'll bring this one up. So you speak of learning as service, but the education, or the, how should I say, the universality of tertiary education is very different in the US, you know, where essentially, my understanding is anybody who wants to can get themselves into higher education, versus in, you know, developing countries or in our part of the world, where university education is very much seen as, you know, a stepping stone towards a career, or as vocational training, or as something which only, you know, quote unquote, the privileged few, you know, can do, and it is seen as, oh, you know, get a university education and it is good career training. So in this kind of context, could you comment on how do we motivate our students to see learning as service, and also would you be able to comment on how would you see, you know, what would be like the basic difference of service learning in a context like Harvard's versus, you know, something like what we, you know, what we are dealing with?
Well, so yeah, so there's so I, you know, I have no so as a, yeah, this is a very good question. So higher education is economically progressive, and you know, societies invest in it, and the developing countries, you know, are it's important for them to develop their higher education systems, you know, so that they can be economically competitive as societies in the, you know, in the 21st century. And it is, you know, higher education, tertiary education, as you put it, you know, does not necessarily mean a you know, a 4-year or a 3-year program either. You know, and I suspect that there are a fair number of students, even in the U.S., who are getting 4-year degrees who could actually do quite, you know, be quite profitably do well by just having a 2-year, you know, a shorter term degree program, and those programs are, you know, are very important also. So when I talk about people reflecting, and you know, and I sort of framed my remarks around a notion of what tertiary education was, which I think is common to Harvard and the great Hong Kong universities, which are now, you know, 4-year programs, and they have both undergraduate and graduate student and professional training programs, all of them. That's really where what I'm thinking about. It's hard to say that in a society where the demands for higher education take a different shape, and the programs of higher education take a different shape, that it's important for every student to take time to think deeply about where they want to be 25 years from now, when their societies are struggling with serious levels of poverty and so on. It's not the same thing. It really isn't the same thing. And I didn't mean to suggest that it was. I think I might just add there that I think it's really quite a wonderful thing that your service learning programs at Paula U are not just are not operating just within Hong Kong, but are operating in other societies that are in other countries and other societies where they're less advanced, and because that not only educates your students about the nature of the needs of other societies, but the contact with university educated students may provide some inspiration to students in those societies to try to gain higher education, perhaps abroad, if not in their home countries.
Thank you so much for that. And on that note, I think that is a wonderful place to end this session. Thank you, everybody, for all of your questions. And Professor Lewis, thank you so much for the amazing talk. And especially, thank you so much for staying up. I know that it is really late. Professor Lewis right now is in Montana. And what time is it?
Right, it is. It's just a little after 1 o'clock in the morning. It's fine. This is not so bad. I've spent many nights.
Oh my God! It's 1 a.m.
I see many thank yous coming across the chat room at the bottom, and I'm really very moved by that. I thank all of you for being here and listening, all 238 of you. That's really quite wonderful. I look there, they're just flashing all these thank yous. So, thanks very much.
I think if you want to write me, Professor Lewis,
I want to say, if you want to write me, I'm easy to find. I'm lewis@harvard.edu, and lewis@harvard.edu, because I was a second-year graduate student when they gave out the first 10 email addresses, and I grabbed Lewis. So you can still reach me as lewis@harvard.edu. So thank you so much. I really was a privilege for me to be able to pull these thoughts together, and I really want to congratulate you for the wonderful program you've put together, and all of the many people that you have working on your service learning program. It's extremely impressive, and you should be very proud. So thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for that. The talk has been recorded, and we will be, there was a question about that as well. It is going to be, there's going to be a link to it later on when we have time to consolidate everything. So for the participants, we are going to ask a little favor from you. We have a feedback form. We want to collect comments. Remember, this is the first time that we are doing this. So, we, if you have any suggestions, or comments, about technical aspects or whatever, please do let us know, right? So please take a little moment to click on that form or to scan that QR code, and give us some comments. And while I have your attention, let me also direct your attention to the schedule for the rest of the symposium. We are starting the virtual expo now. The virtual world is open. It is on the virtual the platform called GatherTown. Now here I want to stress again, we did not make the platform, but we customized it to make an immersive experience. So please don't tell us, oh my God, that's a wonderful platform you made. We did not make the platform, okay? We customized it. Credit goes to where credits due. You can wander around and explore. We have almost 200 interactive objects, videos, slides, whatever in the virtual world, some very interesting posters in the exhibition hall, and some very impressive multimedia exhibits. We are also going to start our first workshop sessions. So participants who have registered for workshops A to D, you should have already gotten instructions on how to join them. And another thing, one exciting thing, one of the workshops, which is a demonstration from our School of Hotel and Hospitality Management, it will also be live streamed on virtual reality on YouTube, all right? So if you have a VR glasses, you can put it in and actually be in there, or you can even if you don't, you can scroll around on YouTube, okay? The link is on our Facebook page and also on the screen right now. And then at 4 p.m. Hong Kong time, it is now 3 p.m. in 1 hour, we will have our second invited talk by Professor Andrew Furco, the Associate Vice President for Public Engagement at the University of Minnesota. So thank you so much again, and we will see you online. Thank you.